My name is Mateus. I don't like to talk about myself in public, but I write this as if I were writing an intimate letter to someone who confused the sound of my silence with indifference. I was born and raised in São Bento do Sul, a small town in the interior of Santa Catarina, Brazil, where everyone knows everyone else's story. I lived most of my life there, a one-story house, the smell of bread drifting from the bakery on the corner, a construction worker who learned to measure wood by eye. I married Isabella at 28. She was the light that softened the harshness of my day. My friends would laugh, saying she softened me like butter on hot bread. Life was simple, sometimes tight in the pockets, but comfortable in the chest. Everything started to change in the autumn, when the wind brought, along with the leaves, a strange feeling. My wife started to grow distant, to respond with monosyllables, coming home late without explanation. At first I thought it was work. I thought it was stress. I was wrong. Let's get to the facts. I am Mateus, husband of Isabella, son of Dona Carmen and Mr. João, two workers who taught me honesty and silence. We lived in a house with a small backyard and a cherry tree that she watered, as if watering our life. I spoke to the neighborhood, proudly telling them I'd married the sweetest person in town. Life went on, us, the bakery, weekends at her parents' house, and the bar with my two childhood friends, Gustavo and Leo. Gustavo is practical, sarcastic, a man who's never been afraid to say what he thinks. Leo is sensitive, a frustrated musician, the biggest defender of emotions. They'd become my sounding board, the two voices who would hold me up in my worst moments. Since childhood, I was always called too quiet, too sensitive. I suffered jokes from peers who called me sissy, a word that made me shrink from parties, made me close my bedroom door at night. This shyness, over time, turned into an anxiety disguised as calm. When I met Isabella, I was surprised by the size of the love and by the courage it gave me. But old wounds never completely heal, they just hide under the skin. At work, I was always respected, but I carried a sense of vulnerability when entering new places. When the first changes came in the relationship, I felt like a boy being pushed to the center of a room, not knowing how to play. Isabella began to close herself off. I started searching for blame in myself. The intimate questions, what did I do wrong, turned into sleepless nights. Gustavo and Leo were my first confidants. Gustavo, with his biting humor, would tell me to use your fist, damn it. But he knew that's not what I needed. Leo, calmly, would listen to me into the early hours, bringing memories of songs and little homemade therapies. Mateus, talk to a professional. Don't carry this alone. They were my anchor when the night felt too long. Their friendship, one foot in reason, Gus, the other in sensitivity, Leo, gave me strength to search for answers. My family was a harbor. My mother, Dona Carmen, cried hidden in her room, but when needed, she'd cover me with a hug that eased the pain. My father, a man of few words, would say, "Grow, son, but don't let anyone walk over you." Isabella had a strained relationship with her parents, distant, proud, and that made her vulnerable. When I told my mother something strange was happening, she asked for calm and suggested we see a therapist. That's how we started seeing Clara, a psychotherapist from the neighboring town. Clara was more than a professional counselor. She was the first outsider who helped me see the situation without the lens of guilt. She guided us to talk calmly, to set boundaries. However, no matter how much therapy opened doors, there was something odd that couldn't be explained by psychological theories. Isabella, who had sensitivity and pride, began to act like someone else. And this sense of estrangement didn't just come from her changed behavior. It came from looks, whispers, and the presence of someone I couldn't, at first glance, see as guilty. We moved to a new phase. Isabella landed an administrative job at a tourism company in the next town over. She was always restless, smart, and was happy with the new challenge. I swelled with pride for her, but that's when the conflict crept in the back door. At the office, a figure appeared who shone like neon in a dark hallway. Lorena, young, blonde, tall, easy smile and a calculated charm that caught everyone's gaze. It's hard not to say she was beautiful. But behind the beauty came a piercing arrogance that cut others like a knife. Lorena approached Isabella with excessive kindness, bringing invitations to lunch, compliments about her competence, small gifts. At first I thought it was normal. It was good for her to make friends at work. However, soon, little signs indicated there was more there than simple friendship. Deleted messages on the phone that Isabella would drop when I'd walk into the room. Outings said to be training that ended in intimate dinners. I tried to talk. She denied it, with the voice of someone who lies and believes her own lie. Lorena, meanwhile, kept a spotless image at the company, with an absent boyfriend, and an aura of someone who wins people over effortlessly. Lorena's arrogance made it impossible to defeat her by common means, and when I tried to talk to co-workers, I felt a veiled resistance, as if Lorena had eyes everywhere, as if her smile was a mask that made others doubt my word. I worked hard. Construction was unstable. I wanted to reinvent myself. When I found a job on a site in the big city, I thought the distance might ease things. But the problem came from within. Isabella, instead of feeling threatened by the distance, became more entangled. The betrayal, when it happened, wasn't just physical. It was a succession of small betrayals. Glances I didn't see, secrets I'd discover by accident, and lies that turned our house into foreign territory. There was a moment I found on our bedroom sofa, a note from someone signed with initials that weren't mine. I felt betrayed and smaller. I tried to talk. I cried. I begged. She listened with empty eyes, like an old movie was playing everything and I couldn't learn what it was about. The antagonist, Lorena, began to exercise a strange power over our routine. Public compliments to Isabella, small favors that created psychological debts. At parties, she'd approach with that smile and say words that sounded like spells. In silence, I faced the cruel feeling someone had indeed bewitched the woman I loved, or so my mind began to narrate what happened. The episode that broke my patience as a silent man was when, on a Saturday afternoon, Isabella left without telling me where, and only returned at dawn, smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize. I asked, and she said it was a meeting with clients. The next morning, I found in her purse a small amulet, a little stone on a chain that I didn't recognize. In the same week, I discovered that Lorena had offered Isabella a treatment, sweet words hiding intentions. When I confronted her, Isabella became furious and called me paranoid. I started to believe in every possibility: jealousy, seduction, emotional brainwashing. I began hearing stories from neighbors and friends, whispers about a woman called Donna Herminia, an old lady, almost hidden on a stone street, who did blessings and rituals. In the backcountry of our city, the supernatural walks hand in hand with the everyday. Some trust blindly in prayers, some are afraid, and some use faith as strategy. My mother-in-law, desperate along with me, suggested we put an end to that influence. It was Leo, my musician friend, who cautiously suggested, maybe people are going down paths that reason can't find. Look for someone who understands other ways. Despite my disbelief, I accepted. Need is strong enough to bend even the firmest certainties. When we were introduced to the witch, she was not the grotesque figure from movies. Donna Herminia was a woman in her early 70s. Firm posture, braided white hair, a kitchen fragrant with dried herbs, tobacco, candle wax, and strong coffee. Her house was like a reliquary. Faded clothes, hanging amulets, old photos. There was an eye carved into wood, and the smell of damp earth. There was nothing theatrical in her speech. It was direct and measured. She looked at Isabella with curiosity, asked questions that seemed to map the soul. not just recount facts. What disturbed me was the sincerity flowing from this woman and the silence she invited me into. Donna Herminia explained that, before any work, it was necessary to understand the root of the problem. She asked for time, long conversations, and some symbolic objects. A photo of us both, a bit of Isabella's hair, a lock that she insisted to cut in a symbolic way, a glass of water she told me to drink, and that would be charged with intention. Some items, however, she said, would remain secret. She named objects she wouldn't disclose, saying that certain words and ingredients would be kept confidential to protect the process and those involved. I accepted. In part because the idea of exposing and detailing rituals seemed dangerous to me. In part because there was a superstition and an ethics of her own. She didn't want the techniques to be used for evil. Donna Herminia also set a challenge, that I should get something belonging to Lorena, something personal, not to use in an offensive way, but to return the energy that had hurt. This item, she said, was crucial for the web to lose a thread. It was risky, because it meant invading someone else's life, stealing a piece of their aura, even if only symbolically. I wrestled with the ethics of that request. Searching for the antagonist's object made me question my own honor. Of course, she made clear that the ritual had consequences and that nothing there guaranteed absolute control. That witchcraft doesn't solve everything with the wave of a wand. Ethics, doubt, and guilt followed me like shadows. On the night of the ritual, Donna Herminia's house felt heavier. Lit candles, a small drum, scents of lavender and cinnamon, but it wasn't a list of ingredients that could be replicated. There were sounds, the distant croak of a frog, the wind blowing through the chimney, a language of words I didn't understand, whispers that seemed to repeat pleas. She guided everything. I will not say easy words so they aren't repeated by just anyone. What I say, I keep, Isabella cried. I felt ashamed of my exhaustion and of the way I had stolen from her the narrative of her own days. My friends, Gustavo and Leo, accompanied me in silence, witnesses that I was not alone in seeking a cure. In the first days after the ritual, things changed as if a curtain had been drawn. Isabella became less receptive to Lorena. My wife's job began to show irregularities. Messages that used to be kept quiet now appeared in public conversations, small slips that revealed Lorena's manipulation. They were not miracles. There were nights Isabella looked at me with confusion, as if she had lost memories. On other nights, I saw Lorena's mask slip, her grace turn into effort. But witchcraft was not without side effects. Lorena, realizing something had changed, plotted a final humiliation. She spread rumors on the company's social networks, lies about Isabella, a fake file implicating her in irregularities. At a company lunch, she hurled accusations that left Isabella in tears. What began as romantic manipulation turned into a campaign of social destruction. Here the true face of the antagonist was revealed. She couldn't stand losing the power she held over those around her. However, Lorena's downfall came slowly. Evidence was gathered by Isabella's attentive friends and by tiny inconsistencies in Lorena's own messages. A video from a meeting, an involuntary recording, and a patchwork of contradictions unraveled in public. The company, analyzing the facts, considered the evidence and fired Lorena. She tried to regain control, but her fragile credibility and the many voices united against her shattered her image. She lost friends, status, and position. The humiliation was public. The exposure of her real intentions led to her firing and local ostracism. The damage, however, left deep marks. Isabella had betrayed me. She was not only guilty of a momentary failing, she had strayed from our promises. To confront her was painful. I could have chosen revenge, but something in my experience as a wounded boy told me not to repeat the cycle. I sought therapy again, We talked for months, with Clara balancing technique and compassion. I discovered that Isabella had often been emotionally manipulated. Lorena had exploited insecurities, leaving her hungry for approval. It wasn't a justification, but an explanation. In the end, Isabella came to me sincerely, told me what she felt, cried for her choices, and asked for forgiveness. The great proof of overcoming came not as a grand gesture, but as small actions. Isabella stopped working at the same company. We went to couples therapy. She gave up contacts who fed her insecurities. For my part, I felt that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Forgiving was rewriting our story with the courage to admit pain, with the daily work of rebuilding trust. And it wasn't easy. There were relapses, jealousy, dry nights of waiting. But little by little, with respect, honesty, and the renewed presence of friends and family, our life began to reorganize. Lorena's life, on the other hand, was a warning. She, who had sought power through manipulation, faced real consequences: dismissal, isolation, and accusations of moral harassment. When we found the records that exposed her schemes, the truth emerged. In the end, what motivated Lorena was a wound, a desire for control that made her cruel. And that somehow humanizes the antagonist. No one is an absolute villain without a story of pain. Still, justice was done. She lost what she valued most, the admiration of others. Today, some years later, I write sitting on the porch, the cherry tree flourishing as if not wanting to disturb time. Isabella and I rebuilt our life with an artisan's patience. We're more careful with what we say, with omissions. There's a new respect, born from the understanding that we need each other to remain whole. I don't see witchcraft as a recipe. I see it as a symbolic intervention that forced us to face what we didn't want to see. Did I use a questionable path? Maybe. But the need for a light at the end of the tunnel sometimes pushes people to places pure reason cannot reach. In the end, I understood that the real magic was within us. The courage to admit mistakes, the honesty to ask for forgiveness, and the integrity to stay committed to rebuilding. Isabella's forgiveness was a courageous gesture. My forgiveness was an act of humility, and together we grew. I learned to listen to my fears without letting them dominate me. She learned to look at her desires without yielding to outside manipulation. And Lorena, she sought refuge far from town. And I hear that in silence she tries to fix what was broken. Witchcraft entered as an element that confronted the mystery. It didn't solve everything. It was no act of faith. It was a turning point that forced us to face what was hidden. Today I recognize the ethical limits of what we did, the need not to prolong scars. The moral I take is simple. The path of hate rarely brings peace, and the path of forgiveness, however hard, heals. If you've read this far, I thank you. This is a confession and an invitation. Comment, share your opinion, or tell a similar experience. I don't say my path is the truth for everyone, only that, in my pain, I found ways to rebuild my life. And if any word here resonates, let it be this: it is possible to come out of the darkness, even when it feels like pacts have been made against you. True overcoming is not dominating others, but rescuing yourself. Final note on what I experienced: the witch's house, the smells, the indecipherable words, and some ingredients were indeed kept secret, for ethics and respect for techniques that should not be trivialized. I offer no formulas or instructions. I describe a human experience, a narrative of pain, manipulation, and finally, redemption. If this story touched you, leave your message. Perhaps by sharing, we can name what haunts us and together find the light.